Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching Blood Sisters and for sticking all the way through to the Q&A. My name is Shayna Macy Warner, and if you haven't seen me pop up on your screen yet, I'm the Assistant Programmer and Community Outreach Coordinator for NewFest, and I am so excited that we're going to be having a one-on-one Q&A with Blood Sisters' amazing director, Michelle Handelman. Hi!
Hi.
How's it going?
All right.
Love this backdrop. Love that we're reminded exactly what we just watched.
Yeah, well, thank you. This was actually from a screening about a year ago that Dirty Looks did at the Tom of Finland House in LA.
Oh,
So
wow,
I
that's
thought they did a great poster. So I wanted to bring it here into New York, into NewFest.
this is the perfect place to bring it. So thank you for that. There's so much, obviously, to talk about with the documentary. So much about politics, about arts and activism, about queer community. But I think what I would love to start off on is just a question about what first motivated you to do this 25th anniversary kind of a tour and a showing of this film, and then what's been different from the first time it premiered to right now, kind of touring the festival circuit?
Well, it's funny actually that this is your first question because it connects to the screening that Dirty Looks did a year ago. About a year or maybe a little bit longer, people just started coming to me. I just started to get all of this renewed interest in Blood Sisters. And I had it had been in and out of distribution many times in the last 25 years. And the last distribution form, it's been available on Amazon for years, which I was handling. But I didn't really think about it. I didn't think about the 25-year anniversary coming up or anything. But then people just started coming to me. And first from Europe, a lot of the festivals that I originally played in Europe were reaching out to me, and I would say to them, some of them, the programmers were people I knew 25 years ago who are still there running the festival. And I would be like, really? You want to play this 25-year-old film? And do you think anyone's going to be interested in one of the programmers, Jürgen Bruning, who does the Porn Film Festival in Berlin, said to me, he goes, oh no, it's all the young programmers. They love it and they want to show it. And so that really opened up this idea of doing a tour, because I started to realize, as I started to talk to a bunch of people, that there was this new generation who had just discovered Blood Sisters on their own and we're loving it, and calling me up and emailing me and telling me how they feel like a part of their history that they felt was hidden had just been given back to them. And it was reaffirming and kind of wild and crazy aesthetically that they loved. And so anyway, this just started to snowball, and as I started to put things together and I started to thinking about restoring it, and all of a sudden I realized, oh, next year's the 25-year anniversary. Maybe we should do a tour. And that's when I started to plan it. So then I started to reach out to people, and we were scheduled to premiere the tour at the BFI Flair Festival in March of this year. But that got canceled due to the pandemic. And so here we are now. So we premiered at Outfest and now at NewFest. And it's really exciting because both of NewFest and Outfest were places that showed the film in 1995.
That is so exciting. And when we first kind of looked at the information for Blood Sisters and saw that it had its New York premiere at NewFest, it was kind of a no-brainer. It's so exciting to continue that kind of legacy.
Well, and I think the second, as I realize you asked me, another part of that question is, how has it been different? And so when Blood Sisters came out, it played everywhere. I mean, I toured around the world with it, probably a couple of times. So it was successful in that sense that it was playing everywhere. But there was always this hesitation. It was always like, we'll play it, but we're going to get in trouble for this. Or we're going to put you on a Sunday morning or Saturday at midnight, all of these odd time slots. And there was a lot of like whispering behind the scenes, and no one loved it. Like no one really except for the total radical outliers. And the programmers in Europe were really supportive and into it. And, sexuality is a much more open conversation over in Europe. But here in the States, it wasn't really welcomed with open arms. And it was always a fight. And so now to have it be welcomed with open arms, it not only is a humbling experience for me to see that this film that I made 25 years ago is really affecting people's lives now, which is really what I always wanted from it. I always wanted it to stand as this piece of feminist history with these, radical, badass leather dykes who were, taking their sexuality and their politics in hand and marching forward. And I thought that needed to be documented, and it needed to have a place in history and not be forgotten. So the fact that it's being welcomed now and rediscovered, it just thrills me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting that you mentioned that so many of the people who are really excited about it this time around, of course, a lot of different people are, but the initial kind of excitement came from younger programmers, because I had a very similar experience in considering it like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. I've never had access to anything like this. And to see the possibility of showing it kind of on a wider scale again is so interesting, because I think, 25 years ago, a lot of us wouldn't have been in a place to see it at all, just practically. So I was wondering how you consider it now in its place, sort of as a closer of that kind of generation gap. Like, do you see it as a way for different generations to have conversations, or do you see it kind of as a like, no, we're just going to let it be a solid piece of history and sit squarely in its time?
Oh, I totally see it as a bridge. And, and that's what every project that I do, all the various art projects I do, I think of as living projects, and they change every day, and they change with whomever watches them and whatever year it is and what the weather's like, so there's always variables going on. So the artwork is always in conversation with that. So with Blood Sisters, I think what's really important is, having people be out and saying, I love this, I need this, I want to hear this, I need to hear this, and I can hear this, is a testament to what Pat Califia talks about in the film about progress and how things have changed. And, and even within the film, Pat talks about the difference between when she came out in the late 70s to when we were making Blood Sisters in the early 90s, and how so much had changed, and how she meets little young dykes now who just come out into leather without having to just come out gay first, right? And so for her, that was real progress that she had seen. And so now we're witnessing the same thing. And I think what's really key is that moment in time in San Francisco, and particularly in San Francisco, was when all of the conversations about gender identity and radical sexuality were being written. None of the books were there before. You had Pat Califia, Gail Rubin, Judith Butler, Susan Stryker, all pioneers in terms of gender identity, both in practice and in theory, and having intelligent, critical conversations about radical sexuality. So that was all happening at that moment in time in San Francisco. And most of those people were all involved in Blood Sisters. I mean, all of them, except for Judith Butler, were part of making Blood Sisters. So I think now that people like yourself and so many other young queer people are reading these texts, and they're being assigned these texts at school, and they're reading them in their gender studies classes, which didn't exist in the early 90s. That, is the reason why Blood Sisters continues to speak to everyone. Because what was going on then in San Francisco was very important. It's very important. These were the people who started this conversation that is happening now. And, I don't look at Blood Sisters as just like an homage to them. I mean, it was very much about their own, messy lives and complicated lives and what it meant to struggle as someone into leather at that time. But they, there's no way around it. They were leaders and provocative, writers and activists, and their voices are still loud and they're still here. Luckily, most of them. I mean, many people in Blood Sisters have passed away, but many are still here.
We're so thankful for them too. And I definitely do hear your point about so much being created right in that time and just being put into writing that maybe formerly wouldn't have been accessible except for in physical scenes too, and within physical community and actually talking. And it didn't really necessarily travel outside so much, like with Patrick's work and with Judith Butler's work. And I was wondering if you have any sort of advice, because of course this documentary is such a huge piece of communication and it's so accessible in its style and everything. So it's easy for somebody who is not in the scene to watch it. Do you have any advice on starting more of those conversations with people who aren't necessarily in the scene and feel well versed in talking about it, to start exploring topics like identities within queer community and like what does a specific identifier mean? I know there's a lot of conversation right now about what words can we use? There's a conversation, can queer people be supportive of SM and of kink, and what place does kink have in Pride and all that? Do you have any thoughts about reaching out in methods other than necessarily making an entire documentary about it?
You just have to live your life. You just have to be out and be who you are and, have those conversations when they happen, but don't let anyone erase you or take away what space you have. When you say, there's still conversations going on about whether the leather community or the kink community is accepted within the greater gay community, I just think that, to me, that's bullshit. That's like bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
You don't tell me how to live. You don't tell me I can't exist because I don't fit into your little rule, your little idea of what this world should be like. I think this is what, Blood Sisters says a lot, and this is what everyone was struggling with then, being kicked to the back of the Pride March, being told you're not allowed to have your whips out during the Pride marches. And to hear that is still going on, I find to be, very disheartening. One of the things I found with the leather community, and part of the reason I was attracted to it, I was always involved in fetish and S&M in my work and in my life in various ways, but I wasn't a big part of any scene really. And I wasn't a big part of this scene till I started to make Blood Sisters and met a lot of people. But one of the things that I loved about the leather community more than any other scenes I've been a part of is that they're so accepting of whatever you were into, whatever weirdness you were into or not weirdness, you just wanted to hang out and watch, whatever you looked like. It was very intersectional. There were, you know, I mean, there were a lot of Native Americans in San Francisco who actually were the people who started International Ms. Leather. And I believe Judy Tallwing was one of the first people who started International Ms. Leather. So there were a lot of people of color and people on all different realms or of the gender spectrum. I mean, this was the gender spectrum before it was even being defined. So, and people didn't have the need to thoroughly define it. You know, there's a lot of definition within S&M. Of course, it's a very hierarchical system, and that's part of the nature of sadomasochism, right? You know, there is a power relationship there, and there are, you know, discussions and laying out what I will and will not have done to me, and everything is very codified and rigid in that sense. But on the human side of it, outside of that structure, it didn't matter, you know, whether you were butch or femme or, you know, whatever in between on that level. It didn't matter what you called yourself. You know, pronouns, it changed, I don't know, hourly, really. It was just about accepting people. And I find that when you're in, you know, being an outsider in any way, shape, or form makes you stronger. And then when you find a group of people who are also outsiders, there's a certain strength in that builds, you know, builds not just character, but it just builds strength to soldier on and live. Because I think a lot of these conversations that we have now in terms of, you know, making safe spaces or making spaces that are specifically for one group or another can be very detrimental. I understand where they're supportive, and I certainly understand the need for people to highly, to find very specific words to identify who they are, because identification is complicated and we're all complicated. And I truly understand that need, but I also see how these words divide people. And if anything, you know, one of the great messages behind Blood Sisters is that we need to work together to support ourselves. Because it was the support of I mean, at that time, you know, it was the height of the AIDS crisis. And so much of the activities that you see in Blood Sisters were actually fundraisers to raise money to help support everyone who was dying from AIDS because the government wasn't doing it. And here we are again, you know, in another pandemic where the government isn't helping us. And so it's really key to just be there for one another and support one another instead of fighting with one another and, you know, bitching about who has the right to do what and when. I'm sorry, I just rambled on about that
No, that's
question for a
wonderful.
while.
Thank you. Thank you so much for what I didn't think was a ramble, what I thought was a very extended thought that I can follow. So that was impressive. Thanks.
Okay.
I actually have just one more question before we have to close, but I was wondering if you had any sort of advice, tips and tricks, and then also pitfalls that you found for other documentarians and also artists of other mediums who are looking to make something political about the community that they're coming from. If you have any sort of like things to avoid or just things that you've learned along the way.
Well, I think it's all about where you train your camera. And the reason I made Blood Sisters, I mean, the main reason is when I went to the International Ms. Leather contest for the first time, and I saw that these women were combining political activism with sexual pleasure, and that they had found a way to have both of them live hand in hand in everything that they do. I mean, part of it was because their lives had been politicized because of who they are, and and what it took to just survive. But if you want to make a film that's political, go find people who are activists and just train your camera on them and let them do the talking. That's how you're going to get your political message across. If you want to make a film about your own political position, then turn the camera on yourself. I don't know about pitfalls. This was the only documentary I've ever made, actually. It was the first doc I've made. I just threw myself into it. And I'm a firm believer in just throwing yourself into whatever it is that you do with, all of your passion and more. As my dear deceased mentor and friend, Jack Dorashow, aka Flawless Sabrina, always said, if it doesn't make you nervous, it's not worth doing. So, put yourself in an uncomfortable space, but a space where you want to learn something, and just dive in.
Amazing. Thank you so much for those closing remarks and quote. And of course, we love Flawless Sabrina and miss her dearly. So thank you so much for coming on to do this Q&A with me. Thank you for Blood Sisters, and just thank you for being here at NewFest again.
Thank you, Shayna. I'm so sad we can't all be together in person, but it's really special to know that Blood Sisters had its New York premiere at NewFest, and now here we are 25 years later doing it again. So, maybe we'll be doing this in another 25 years. If maybe I won't be alive, but maybe the film will still be. So thank you so much. I'm grateful that you invited me back.
Of course. Thank you so much. And also thank you to everyone watching.
Bye.
Oh, goodbye. Hello. It's just me again. Thank you so much for watching Blood Sisters. We appreciate everything you watch. And if you want to see even more beautiful filmmaking about bodies, about queer spaces, about kink, sexuality, completely recommend that you check out a few of our shorts programs. We have Everybody and Booty, which is really fun. We have Till We Can Meet Again, which is about the importance of queer spaces. And then we also have a really fun shorts program called Laughing, Loving, Fighting, Fucking. And that's our girls shorts, which of course encompasses many genders. So go check them out, go to newfest.org, and hope to see you at another Q&A. Thanks so much.